In 1981, scientists confirmed that the crested ibis no longer existed in Japan. Not endangered, not critically low. Gone. The last verified wild population on the Japanese archipelago had been reduced to zero. What the official conservation record does not explain is why 27 years later, the Japanese government began paying rice farmers, not to protect the bird, to grow rice in a specific way, and why that decision generated 4.45 billion yen. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a single agricultural certification scheme on a remote island in the Sea of Japan rebuilt a species from 7 surviving individuals, and why that mechanism works in a way that $100 million of American conservation spending has completely failed to replicate. This is not a story about birds. It is a story about incentive architecture. Here is the detail that does not fit. The crested ibis population on Sado Island is now approaching 500 birds. The farmers who share the land with them are getting richer every year. The ornithologists did not plan for that part. The crested ibis, toki in Japanese, is not a spectacular animal in the conventional sense. It does not have the visual authority of an eagle. Its plumage is white with a faint rose tint in breeding season, its face bare and red, its beak long and curved downward. For more than 1,000 years, it moved through the flooded rice fields of East Asia, Japan, China, Korea, the Soviet Far East, feeding on loaches, frogs, freshwater crabs, and small fish in the shallow water between the rice rows. Japanese imperial poetry recorded it. Its feathers appeared in ceremonial contexts. Farmers who planted and harvested alongside it did not think of it as wildlife. They thought of it as a permanent feature of the landscape, a thing that had always been there. The collapse happened in 3 distinct, overlapping waves across less than 1 century. The first wave was hunting. Japan established formal protection for the crested ibis in 1934, but by that date, commercial hunting for feathers and specimen collection had already reduced the mainland population to isolated remnants. The legislation arrived after the damage was structural. The second wave was chemical. Following the Second World War, the Japanese government aggressively promoted pesticide-intensive rice cultivation to maximize yields on a land-scarce, rebuilding nation. The pesticide program succeeded precisely as designed. It eliminated insects and invertebrates from the paddy ecosystem at scale. Loaches disappeared. Frog populations collapsed. The crested ibis is a specialized wetland forager. When the shallow water prey base is chemically removed from 1.6 million hectares of agricultural land, a medium-sized wadding bird does not adapt. It starves across an entire generation. The third wave was geography. Wetlands were drained for agricultural conversion. Streams were concrete-channeled for flood control. The complex, flooded, semi-wild margins that toki used for nesting were systematically rationalized out of existence by the same modernization program that was making Japan food secure and economically competitive. Sado Island, 40 kilometers off the Niigata coastline in the Sea of Japan, held longer than anywhere else. Its isolation, its traditional farming practices, and the cultural attachment of its residents to the bird preserved a small population into the late 1970s. Then that population failed too. By 1981, Japanese ornithologists confirmed what they had feared for a decade. 0 wild individuals remained on Japanese soil. What happened next required a geopolitical event that conservation science had not anticipated. In the Qinling Mountains of Shanxi Province, a Chinese research team located 7 surviving wild birds. 7. The global population of a species that had been present across 4 nations and 2,000 years of agricultural civilization had been reduced to 7 individuals in a single remote mountain range. China and Japan, nations with a deeply fractured political relationship, formed an emergency scientific partnership within months of the discovery. Japan received breeding pairs. A captive program was established on Sado Island at the Sado Japanese Crested Ibis Conservation Center. The program worked in the narrow technical sense. The birds bred, chick counts increased across 2 decades. By the mid-2000s, The captive population was viable and growing. But releasing a captive-bred crested ibis into the same Sado Island agricultural landscape that had starved the original wild population produced exactly the result the biologists already knew to expect. The bird does not find food in a modern chemically managed paddy. It lands in an ecologically dead field and it dies. Captive breeding, in isolation from landscape transformation, is not conservation. It is inventory management for a species with nowhere to go. In 2008, something changed, and what the designers of the next phase decided to do had almost nothing to do with ornithology. The official rescue program had, by every measurable standard, succeeded. The captive population was growing. The science was sound. The partnership between two nations that had spent decades in political hostility was producing live chicks on an island in the Sea of Japan. And not one person in that building had yet asked the question that would eventually make all of it matter. What happens to the bird after the cage opens? Before we unpack the radical mechanism this bird used to rewrite an entire island, we need to baseline our own map. Drop a comment right now with the state or county you are watching from, and let us know if your local region is facing its own ecological or agricultural collapse. Subscribing to this channel ensures you stay pinned to the data as we expose the hidden metrics the mainstream continues to ignore. Now back to the Sea of Japan, because the official rescue program was about to walk directly into a structural trap. But here is the problem that no amount of captive breeding could solve on its own. A bird released into a paddy with no food in it does not establish a wild population. It starves. The scientists on Sado Island understood this. They had watched it happen. Captive-bred toki, healthy by every clinical measure, correct weight, correct plumage, correct flight capability, were released into the surrounding agricultural landscape and failed to locate adequate food within days. The paddies looked correct. They were not correct. Decades of chemical application had removed the biological substrate the bird was built to exploit. The field was a stage set. It had the right dimensions and none of the content. What the Conservation Center had produced, at considerable scientific effort and genuine international cooperation, was a population of birds that were biologically complete and ecologically homeless. Not endangered in the cage, functionally extinct the moment the cage opened. This is the structural trap that localized conservation efforts consistently fail to model. You cannot restore a species to a landscape that has been chemically and hydrologically redesigned to exclude it without first redesigning the landscape. The bird is not the variable. The land is the variable. Tracking these multi-layered institutional failures requires an audience that values hard data over surface-level narratives. If you demand this level of investigative ground truth, take a second to hit the subscribe button and join our research collective. Now, look closely at the calendar, because in 2008, the island's designers stopped relying on charity and started using economic engineering. The solution was not a conservation program, it was a label. In 2008, Sado Island launched the Toki Tokyorasu Sato certification scheme, translated roughly as living with the crested ibis. The mechanism was precise and deliberately mercenary. To earn the certification and sell rice at 4,000 yen per 5 kilogram bag, a significant premium over standard market price, farmers were required to reduce chemical pesticide application by 50%, cease embankment weeding, flood their fields through winter, and submit to biannual biodiversity audits. The bird's survival was not the incentive. The price premium was the incentive. The bird's survival was the byproduct. 1,600 hectares converted immediately. According to research validated by Niigata University, the scheme generated 4.45 billion yen in regional tourism revenue. In 2012, 4 years after launch, wild toki chicks hatched on Sado Island for the first time in 36 years. The wild population, which had stood at 0, began scaling toward 500 birds. Not charity, not volunteer labor, not government mandate enforced through penalties, a rice bag label. And then the economic data began arriving, and it told a story that the ornithologists had not set out to write. Because if a premium pricing scheme on one island could reverse a century of ecological destruction in 4 years, the question that follows is deeply uncomfortable. Why hasn't every country with an extinction crisis tried this? And why is the most expensive bird conservation program in American history still failing? But Japan is not the only country where a bird pulled back from the absolute edge of extinction has reshaped the landscape. If you thought 7 ibises rebuilding an island economy was unexpected, wait until you see the American bottleneck. In 1987, wildlife biologists made a decision that was, by the standards of conservation science, entirely correct. The last 27 wild California condors remaining on Earth were captured from the skis above the American Southwest and placed into a captive breeding program jointly administered by the San Diego Zoo and the Los Angeles Zoo. The program worked. It worked extraordinarily well. Captive populations grew. Breeding pairs multiplied. Beginning in 1992, condors were reintroduced to the wild across California, Arizona, Utah, and Baja California. Hundreds of birds, tens of millions of U.S. taxpayer dollars invested across 3 decades of sustained institutional effort. The condors are still dying. According to data from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, lead poisoning, ingested through fragmented ammunition in hunter-killed carcasses, remains the primary documented cause of condor mortality in the wild. The birds are released into a landscape where the hunting industry, whose ammunition fragments are the primary toxicological vector, has faced no mandatory federal transition away from lead. The landscape was not redesigned. The incentive structure was not touched. This structural failure spans across the entire American West. For those of you watching from the western states, especially California, Utah, or Arizona, let us know in the comments if you've personally witnessed the intense institutional battle over public lands and condor habitats. Your localized field observations keep our data maps accurate. Now, look at the final invoice for this regulatory paralysis. Because the difference between Sado Island and the American Southwest is not funding, and it is not scientific capability, and it is not political will in the conventional sense. It is one thing. Sado Island changed the economic incentives of the people who controlled the land. America did not, and the birds are paying the difference. If you breed an endangered species in captivity, but release it back into the unchanged, toxic socioeconomic landscape that killed it in the first place, you are not saving nature. You are constructing a museum on life support. 7 birds, 1 island, a rice bag label, 4.45 billion yen, 500 wild animals reclaiming a landscape that human industry had chemically emptied in a single generation. The mechanism was not charity, it was not a sacrifice, it was profit redirected. The question is no longer whether market incentives can restore ecosystems. Sado Island answered that in 4 years. The question is why we continue to spend public money releasing animals into the same conditions that killed them, rather than spending a fraction of that money redesigning the conditions themselves. We already know how to do this. We have the data, we have the model. What we have chosen instead is the comfort of the cage, the appearance of rescue without the cost of change. What other multi-billion-dollar global industries are we actively protecting while pretending to fix the crises they cause? Drop your thoughts below alongside your county or state, and if this investigation changed how you see the landscape, subscribe to this channel. We will see you in the next file. The birds came back. The question is whether we deserve to have them.